I've even got my Stephen King shirt on. It's one of my favorite shirts. Now I probably should have started off with this book first because this is his first full published book. It's not Misery, what am I doing? I'm not selling this very well. Ever since I started talking about Stephen King on my booktube, I have gotten asked this question a multitude of times, and that is, what Stephen King book should I start out with? How do I read Stephen King? I'm a little intimidated on where to start. Where do I start? Although I think I'm somewhat familiar with all of his books, I have not read all of them. I read a good chunk of them, and from that bit of experience, I'm going to be sharing with you guys my recommendations I've seen across the internet and just in general from other constant readers. Now, before we get started, I do want to preface this video and say I don't think that there's any right or wrong way to read or start reading Stephen King. I, in fact, started with a very non-conventional book, which I will talk about later in this video, but I do want to say that there is possibly a way people like to read Stephen King because there is a Stephen King multiverse, meaning that there are a lot of references from other books in his other books, and there's a possibility of maybe spoiling the end of some books with other books if you catch the references. Mind you, they are typically very small references to other books, but they can possibly spoil it for you. So if you are the type of person who just doesn't want to deal with any of that, I will try my best to guide you through that. I also want to point out there is a very helpful map someone created, which basically lays out some of the references. I'll link it down below as well so you guys can kind of plan your reading journey with that as well. But I'm going to do my best to kind of explain to you guys where I think are good places to start, why, how. I hope I'm making sense. Let's just go ahead and get into it. Now for this video, I'm coming at you guys from all different angles. We're going to be talking about great starter books for everyone. We'll be talking about people who like longer books, some of the different genres he writes. Now, the first book recommendations I'm going to be giving you guys are for the type of readers who are intimidated by Stephen King, who don't want a super long book to read, because Stephen King has plenty of those, and just someone who wants to get familiar with his writing style. These are pretty much generally recommended by other fellow Stephen King fans as great starter books. Now, all of these are in no particular order. Now, one of the books that I recommend starting off with is Salem's Lot. Now, I believe this is the second book that was published by Stephen King, and Salem's Lot is basically a rough rendition of Dracula by Stephen King, his own interpretation of it. So it's a great vampire-based book. It's also based in the town of Jerusalem's Lot, which is referenced in some of his later titles. Why is this a great book in my opinion? Because number one, you could read this in a couple sittings. It's one of his shorter books, and also because I feel like this is a really good example at something that I think Stephen King is very strong at, and that is creating a town and a cast of characters that all relate together in some way, shape, or form, and creating this web of a town and really giving you that small town vibe. And Jerusalem's Lot, or Salem's Lot I should say, is just that. This is excellent for this time of year since it is pretty spooky themed, having that like vampire based type of book. So this is a book that I really enjoyed. Very, very good book. Now, I probably should have started off with this book because this is actually his first book that was published and basically brought the Stephen King name to fame and gave him his first big writing deal, and that is Carrie. Now, Carrie is about this girl who's a bit of an outcast in her town who finds a way to avenge herself. She's brought up by like this hyper-religious mother who's very strict, and you know, if you've seen the movie or if you've seen any memes of Carrie, you might kind of get the gist of this book. Now, similar to Salem's Lot, why I think this is a good starter book is because you could really read this in a sitting. I actually finished this in one day. It's definitely a classic, and if you're the type of person to want to read through publication order, then obviously you'd start off with Carrie. Now, I will say this. If Carrie is not your cup of tea, do not give up on Stephen King because Carrie is not my favorite Stephen King book. I think he has much stronger titles, but like I said, because this is a shorter novel, it's one he's famous for, and there are a ton of people who genuinely love this book. This is another book that is highly recommended by a lot of other people, and also a recommended start from me. Misery. Now, I believe this book has kind of almost got like a new surge of fame because of the movie, which, let's be honest, the movie is a bit older at this point, but a lot of people have seen that famous scene.
God, sing. It's for the best. Sing, please.
You guys didn't think I'd actually do that to you guys, did you? Now, of course, Misery was a very popular book on its own right. I'm just saying the movie is also very popular as well, but Misery is one of those excellent books if you want to get like a different taste of Stephen King's writing, because Misery relies more on, like I said, the psychological terror that someone else can instill in you that you have no control over. That is something that is possible in real life, which gives this such a bone-chilling vibe. Now, unlike Salem's Lot and some of other Stephen King books, Misery basically takes place in a one-setting situation, which this is also pretty famous for, because it's got to be difficult to create that much fear in a place that is essentially static. It's mind-bending, it's good, it'll keep you turning the page because you gotta figure out what happens to Paul Sheldon and Annie Wilkes. And I have to say, Annie Wilkes is probably one of Stephen King's most famous villains. So definitely give this one a go if you are kind of looking for something a little bit different. A very strong recommendation from me and from other people. So those 3 books are definitely books that are recommended a ton, and they are books that a lot of people stand behind, as well as me, as far as a place to start with Stephen King. So no matter which one of those books you pick, I think you're going to be starting off on a good note. But another place that a lot of constant readers will recommend to start is actually his short story collections. Now, Stephen King is actually known for his short stories. In fact, he had a lot of short story releases in magazines and catalogs before he even had some books published. In fact, a lot of readers will actually say some of Stephen King's strongest work is his short stories. Night Shift and Skeleton Crew. So let's go ahead and start off with Night Shift, because this was published before Skeleton Crew, and it's actually the one that I'd recommend more out of the 2 short story collections. Now, that's because, number one, this has a bit of like shorter stories, so you get a taste for each of his genres of writing in this book. And in my opinion, I think there are stronger short stories in this than Skeleton Crew. I actually really like this one a lot better. Now, like I said, he has a lot of different styles in here, whether you're looking for the stomach-churning type of stories, or maybe you're looking for more of like the psychological thriller. Perhaps you have more of the flavor for grief and thought-provoking stories. Maybe you like stories that make your palms sweaty, or maybe you like spooky things that come back to life and, you know, decide to kill you. Whatever you like, it's pretty much in Night Shift. This is a good taste tester for Stephen King, a Stephen King flight, if you will. Now we have Skeleton Crew, which is a bit longer, if you can kind of see the width of the spine of these books. And like I said, this is not the short story collection that I'd recommend out of the 2, but if you do want to start off with a short story collection, or maybe you really like Night Shift and wanted to read another one, I'd recommend Skeleton Crew. Now, Skeleton Crew, some of the more popular short stories in this is The Mist, which they've made a movie adaptation of, as well as The Jaunt. I think that's another pretty strong short story in this, because that is more science fiction. My personal favorite was The Raft, because I like horror, so The Raft to me was a really good one in this. Now, the stories in this are a little bit longer. I believe The Mist was like 130 pages, so they're almost like novellas on their own. And I would definitely say that this has got some good ones in it. Now, I do feel like I like more of Night Shift better, and the reason that I'm talking about Skeleton Crew in this book is because I know there are short story fans out there, so I wanted to give you guys more variety, and because I see this recommended so much, so I did want to give a shout out to it and say, like, I didn't forget about it necessarily, and just kind of discuss why I think it's a good place to start. Maybe not the strongest, but an option if you are like me and motivated by book covers, and you're like, I just have to read that because I got to figure out why there's a monkey with some symbols on the front of the book, and I need to know why I'm scared of this thing. So There you go. Like I said, any of those books would be good places to start with Stephen King. I don't believe you're going to be ruining any of the Stephen King multiverse in those. In fact, I think a lot of those you'll have to start off with to get into the Stephen King multiverse. Now, I'm going to talk about my personal recommendations as far as where you could start besides those very standard starter books, because I just want to give you guys a little different flavor. Starting off with The Green Mile. You guys, The Green Mile is easily one of my favorite books. It makes my heart jump every time I think about this book, because this book is so good. Now, when The Green Mile was originally released, it was released in a 6-part format. Stephen King would release each part per month, so you get like a dose of this book every month, which is why I'm recommending it, because despite me having like the full compilation here, you can actually still pick up the serialized version, so you can like read them part by part as Stephen King initially intended. I do believe personally that this is one of Stephen King's stronger books, and the characters themselves are just so provoking. Paul Edgecombe in this, and John Coffey, that's with the Y, not like the drink, touched my heart. This is one of those books that I'm genuinely jealous of other people reading it for the first time, because they get to experience it for the first time, and I wish I could experience it over and over again for the first time. But I would definitely recommend this if maybe you're trying to transition into Stephen King writing, if you want to like read him without getting like smacked in the face gore. There's still some in this, but you know, it's not as overt as some of his other books. And plus, if you just read the part by part, bam, you read like a 600-page Stephen King book. Like I said, this is a bit less conventional than other recommendations, but I'm basing this on my own experience, because I personally started off reading 11/22/63. Now, I'd say this is definitely for, again, those people who like maybe more science fiction books, who are nonfiction buffs like me. I personally like nonfiction, even though this isn't actually nonfiction. It's just obviously the JFK assassination is a heavy plot line in this book, so I like that it had that twist to it and had a bit of that like historical retelling through the plot. And also, if you just, there's dog hair. And also, if you want to read an epically long book, because this is like the doorstopper type books. It has like 850 pages. At the time, I read this on my Kindle and listened to it on Libby, so I didn't realize how long this book was, but now I can say I've read one of Stephen King's longer books. Similar to The Green Mile, this is just one of those books that makes my heart flutter every time I think about it. Again, one of my all-time favorite books, what I started off reading Stephen King with, and everyone that I have talked to or read online that has read this is absolutely in love with it, and that is for good reason. I can almost promise you, you will love this book. Okay, so another recommendation of a place you could start is actually kind of going around the idea, like I said earlier in this video, that Stephen King does a really good job of like building towns and a cast of characters and how they relate to one another. Well, let me introduce you to the Castlerock series, which is a series based in Castle Rock, Maine. It's a fictional town that Stephen King has created, and there's a cast of characters that essentially appears in all of the books. Now, I believe the main Castle Rock series exists in 4 main books. I know it's mentioned in a couple of his short stories, like The Sundog and such, but I'm just going to be focusing on the main books for now. Which are these 4? Now let me go ahead and tell you where to start, because I personally read them in a completely different order, because they can't spoil one another for you guys. That's why I'm trying to be like a little bit careful when I'm speaking about Castle Rock. But like I said, if you really want to get like immersed in a town, do the Castle Rock series. So technically in publication order, we have The Dead Zone, Cujo, The Dark Half, and Needful Things. But the reason why I say technically is because I believe The Dead Zone somewhat spoils Cujo if you catch it. Now, it is a very, very short reference, so if you're reading it and you're not paying attention, you might not even notice it, so that's up to you. Proceed with caution. You'll have to know what type of reader you are, but both of these are really, really good starting places. Now, The Dead Zone for me is another one of my favorite Stephen King books. Again, both of these books are shorter, so they're a little bit easier to digest, and The Dead Zone actually kind of deals with some of like similar themes as 11/22/63. If you've read both, I think you'll kind of know what I mean, because it's very subtle. But The Dead Zone is essentially kind of dealing with the idea of loss. Essentially, the main character in this, he goes into a coma and then gains like powers, and he has to find this guy who's killing people. I'm not selling this very well. The Dead Zone is so good, and I'm not really sure why it doesn't get as much recognition as some of his other titles that I'm going to be mentioning here in a second as like a good starting off point for Stephen King. But I think The Dead Zone is a really, really good, it's like a mystery thriller / horror / all kinds of goodness. So I definitely think The Dead Zone is a good place, and Cujo is also another good starting book. Now, Cujo, for me, I was just kind of dying to read because, hello, rabid dog. I need to get my hands on that and figure out what's going on. And this is a bit of one of those Stephen King books that I think, I don't want to spoil the ending, so I shouldn't say anything about the ending, but I will say this. It's not all flowers and rainbows, and so I like that about Stephen King. He's like almost painfully real in some of his writing where you're just like, oh, gut punch. So Cujo's a gut punch, but do you like gut punches? I think both of these are good. Like I said, you can go by publication order. You can go, by Cujo first if you are afraid you'll catch the reference in The Dead Zone, or you could do like me and just read them completely out of order. I read The Dead Zone, Needful Things, Cujo, and then The Dark Half. So I read them completely out of order, and it did not ruin the experience at all for me. Definitely not a big deal if you read them out of order, but there is somewhat of a way that they're intended to be read. And so, like I mentioned, the reason that I'm recommending this is if you kind of want like a little multiverse in a multiverse of Stephen King, I think the Castlerock series is really entertaining. It's fun to stick with the cast of characters and see all the relations between them, and I really enjoyed the books individually on their own. So at this point, I have mentioned popular recommendations by a lot of other Stephen King fans, as well as myself. I've mentioned my own recommendations, and now I'm going to move into the honorable mentions. If you want to stop watching the video at this point because I don't want to confuse you guys, or I've made this confusing up until this point, you don't have to watch this. The reason why I'm talking about the honorable mentions is because I know in the comment section down below, people are going to be like, why didn't you recommend this book? Why didn't you talk about this one? Well, okay, this is for you people out there who are going to say those types of things, and I'm actually going to explain why I didn't necessarily throw them in like my strongly recommended section of this video. Oh, buddy, you getting up? Hi, Angel. Buddy's readjusting. There we go. The Shining. Now, I don't know why I paused so dramatically there. The Shining is a book that I see a lot of people recommend. However, I wouldn't strongly recommend this to start off if you're new to Stephen King. Why? Because this is a slow burn. And I know that slow burns for some people, it's very polarizing. It could be hit or miss. And slow burns for Stephen King can somewhat get gratuitous. Because let's face it, he is already pretty gratuitous with his writing. And then adding a slow burn on top of that, if you're not used to it, you might not like it. And The Shining for me is definitely at least what I'd categorize as one of those types of books. Did I like this book? Yes, I do love this book, but I just feel like if I were going to recommend Stephen King books, I'd recommend other books way before I'd recommend this one. And I think obviously this is a great book on its own, but I also think a lot of people will recommend this because of the movie. But, I'm trying to do the books recommended outside of the movies. So the book itself, a little bit of a slow burn. Some people might not like it. You might find it boring. The other book, I know people are going to be offended that I did not recommend it right off the bat, but I have my reasonings, is Pet Sematary. Now, the reason why I don't recommend this right off the bat for first-time readers of Stephen King is because this is a lot. This is a very emotionally daunting book. And in fact, Stephen King considers this one of his scariest books because the theme is a little bit, it's very real. It hits too close to home. It's hard. It's heartbreaking at some points. It's very grief-oriented. And so if you are the type of person who is really affected by grief-related themes in books, I would not recommend this. This would probably smack you upside the head because his writing is so good in this that it is, you experience the loss with the characters. And because the loss is so significant in this book, it might be too heavy and too much, and you might just be like, I can't, I'm traumatized. Although I will say a lot of other Stephen King books definitely have trigger warnings in that. That one for me is just like, ooh, it's heavy. And I think he's got some other strong books that are more of like, you know, ooh, vampires, ooh, scary rafts or scary laundry machines. Last but not least, the final two books I'm going to be talking about, I actually have as my microphone stand because they are that hefty of books. So let me go ahead and fetch them out from under there. Woo! I almost couldn't do that with one hand. Could you guess? Now, if you're the type of person who likes epically long books, you'll see a lot of people recommend The Stand and It. Now, the reason why these are in my honorable mention section is because, number one, I know a lot of people recommend these to start off with. Number two, I've never read these books, so I can't recommend books that I haven't read yet. And the reason that I haven't read them is also the reason why I wouldn't recommend these in my like strongly recommend start off with these books. Are we seeing how big these books are? Granted, this coming from the girl who started off with 11/22/63, but I went into that book fully unknowing how long that book was, and I just think those two books, you know, maybe ease into it a little bit more. If you are the type of person, you know, you're perfectly capable and you enjoy reading epic novels like that, go for it. Start off with it. I've heard great things, but I can't personally recommend it because I haven't read them. They intimidate me a little bit, and I wanted to get some other reading done before I even went into these. Anyways, guys, so that is where I'd recommend starting off with reading Stephen King, books I'd strongly recommend, books I'd personally recommend, some honorable mentions, and I hope this was helpful. I hope I didn't overcomplicate or confuse you guys, but just keep in mind, he has so many books that I just wanted to make this video, but also do it justice and not forget some of the books that I really feel like have put Stephen King on the map. And just keep in mind in general, like with anything when it comes to reading, there's no wrong way to do it. I just wanted to explain like my thought process when it comes to picking books myself, what order I typically like to go in, or order that I see a lot of other readers go in, because I know that there are some people out there who are like, I want to do it the right way. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys thought of this video, if you guys agree or disagree with my recommendations, if you guys think that there are better books to start off with, or even some of your favorite Stephen King books, because I'd love to check them out. I'm sure my other viewers would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this as well. And as always, I hope you guys are happy and healthy, and don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, share with your friends and family, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys!